This is officially the Pisgah National Forest case, part 2, on the John and Irene Bryant hiking trail incident and similar mysterious disappearances that happened on that trail. So that's coming right up. Look forward to it. It's something else. Thank you. This is again the Pisgah National Forest, where John and Irene Bryant disappeared. And there's many who have been talking about these circumstances for some time. They are still questioning whether or not the case was ever handled in the proper manner. Gary Michael Hilton was seen as the sole suspect, but based upon new evidence, new information that's come out, and more that's ongoing, that has kept coming out, it has been clear for some time that he likely wasn't the original person involved in this murder. The National Park killer was known as Gary Michael Hilton. He was born November 22nd, 1946 in Georgia. He was arrested January 5th, 2008. Currently awaiting a death row sentence, up from life in prison in North Carolina and also Georgia. As I stated, he was born in Atlanta, but the earliest account we have is when he was 13 years old. He shot his own stepfather, Nilo DeBage, in the abdomen. I triple checked that was his real name because I wasn't familiar with it at the time. Anyway, Hilton is then sent to a mental institution when his stepfather did not press charges. Understandably, the mother didn't want him in the house either, and he got out, so he went to live with Don and also Mark Jeffers. I think they were the foster care, but I couldn't find anything to confirm or deny this fact. When he was 17 years old, he enlisted in the Army, where he got his GED. Different sources say different things about Gary Hilton. One states he was a paratrooper, while yet another source states he was part of a small group in charge of specialized missiles that would kill if they were ever used. Either way, it was during his Army career as a cadet that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and admitted to a military mental institution. Between his discharge in 2008, he was arrested for drugs, theft, possession of a firearm with no license, more than several DUIs, yet he never served time when this occurred. He also was married, but then divorced 3 times. He was arrested in 2008, bringing his killing days to an end. Gary Hilton had a higher than average IQ of 120, and he either had attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, one of the above. Different sources state different things, but he was on Ritalin. For those who are not familiar, ADD is classified as the inability to focus, but most people with it actually hyperfocus. We are the best multitaskers you ever see. ADHD is ADD, except you tend to be more energetic. You might drum your fingers on the table or tap your foot in a lecture. I'm bringing these things up because they were part of Gary Hilton's life, but he did not commit these crimes because of this disorder or even because of Ritalin. His untreated schizophrenia may have played a part, but he has never been blamed. I haven't found anything where he's ever said why he did what he did. But it doesn't matter. I know a lot of people are interested in the psychology behind these killers, or there wouldn't be documentaries. But the real point here is, folks, this is demonstrating something that hasn't been revealed before. Gary Michael Hilton was a part of an armed forces group for the Army that was discharged. That's correct, discharged And who else was in the Army, right? Who was part of the armed forces at the time? That's correct. Clark Jones was a secretary of the Navy and also of the armed forces at that time. And where did he live exactly? He lived near the Pisgah National Forest on a farm, and ironically enough, in an actual lodge, community lodge, not that far from the National Forest. So, and that's going to be examined. We're going to be looking into this quite a bit more. One of the people who knew Hilton spoke of hiking the Appalachian Trail and spoke to her father that day. She went to Bryson City, North Carolina, where she rented a small storage unit. In 2009, a store clerk saw an article about Rosanna. Remember selling her a backpack around that time. She disappeared for that hike. She remembered seeing a man appearing to be in his 60s with her, and she appeared very nervous. Hilton told the store clerk that he was traveling as a preacher, which is what made him memorable. Hilton resembles the sketch a private investigator made, and according to Murderpedia, Hilton admitted to beating Rosanna. Police have evidence that he used her debit card after she went missing. But unfortunately, there's no way to verify this, as Rosanna's body was never found. So they claim that Hilton is who killed Rosanna, the witness. But because Rosanna's body was never recovered, and they never actually spoke to the other eyewitnesses in the area, there's no way to 100% confirm that was in fact Hilton. You see? So now that it's very well known that Mr. Hilton had a relationship with Clark Jones, at minimum, we cannot rule out at this point that Jones was in fact there near the Pisgah National Forest on that hiking trail, and that he was looking directly at Rosanna, that he may well have been there because he lived directly next door and nearby, and that's no coincidence. And we can no longer discount that as coincidence based upon all of the amount of available evidence that's been put forward and that's come out. On December 1st, 2006, Gary Hilton comes across 46-year-old Cheryl Dunlap reading beside the car in Leon Sinks, Florida. She was a nurse and a Sunday school teacher. She was reported missing later that week, and she never arrived back to teach her class. He used her ATM card on December 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, withdrawing money. This told detectives in the area that the masked man knew Miss Cheryl's PIN number. Her body was found in Apalachicola National Forest by a group of hunters 2 weeks later. Fast forward to October. October 22nd, 2007, 80-year-old John Bryant and his 84-year-old wife, Brenda, meaning Brenda Irene Bryant, went hiking in Pisgah National Forest, located in West North Carolina. The couple were avid hikers, living in Horseshoe, North Carolina, only 10 miles away. That's less than 20 minutes by that type of car. They parked their maroon Ford Escape at Yellow Gap Road near US 276. Their family members reported them missing after not hearing from them for 2 weeks. A search party that was enormous was organized to use all the couple's cell phone records. Irene had even called 911. The search party located a woman's body covered with leaves right off of the hiking trail. November 10th, she was found on the Barnett Branch Trail. Suspecting it was Irene, they sent the body to Chapel Hill, where it was determined that it was Irene, who had been bludgeoned to death with a blunt object. Since this was considered a homicide, the case was handed over to FBI officials. They offered a $10,000 reward, but nothing came. At the same time, Bryant's debit card was used to remove $300 from ATMs in Ducktown, Tennessee, and that was only 130 miles from Pisgah National Forest. Surveillance cameras at the ATM showed an older man in a rain jacket, which obscured his face entirely. John was still considered a missing person, possibly kidnapped by his wife's murderer. Now, this makes for an interesting read, folks, because other evidence that has been examined already shows that somebody liked wearing rain jackets. It wasn't Gary Hilton. Hilton was certainly out there, but somebody who really liked wearing rain jackets is Clark Jones. That's right. So, how do we know at all anymore whether or not Clark Jones was not out there in the woods on that actual hiking trail? The answer is we do not know. But there is a lot of circumstantial evidence that is now leaning in the direction that he was definitely out there at minimum. And it could not have only been just a random occurrence with Hilton. Hilton was unstable. He had mania and manic dissociative disorder. He did not wear long jackets or long coats. He was extremely short. And it just does not describe this older man who was clearly in his 60s or late 50s. But what might describe that is in fact Clark Jones. That's correct. There's other things that should really be looked at and examined. In 2008, a hunter accidentally discovered a skull in Nantahala National Forest between Pisgah and Ducktown. After calling the deputies, they found a spine and pelvis 20 yards from there. I am going to mention Michael Scott Lewis, but I don't think he was killed by Gary Hilton at all. A fisherman discovered Michael's dismembered, decapitated body on November 21st, 2007, at Tomoka State Park near Ormond Beach, Florida. Hilton was deemed innocent because the DNA, according to a source, didn't match. I think his girlfriend Nelsie Tetley is a more likely suspect because about 11 years later, she did the same thing to another boyfriend, and she was arrested and charged with murder, disorderly conduct, when she cut up the 55-year-old boyfriend Jeffrey Albertsman. She left his head and torso in his house to be discovered by friends who called law enforcement. Now, this is the interesting part. Again, Tetley, Nelsie Tetley is what they call her, was also a member of the Craig rock climbing group, interestingly enough. And what is that linked to exactly? That's tied directly to Clark Jones. So clearly there was something going on out here near the Pisgah National Forest, for a fact. But it is not the story at all that everyone has been told. And that's starting to become extremely clear, especially today. Hiker Seth Blankenship stumbled upon the crime scene where Hilton tried to abduct her. There were 2 water bottles, dog treats, a silver hair barrette, sunglasses, and a baton. Once Hilton had Meredith captive, he demanded her banking pin. She gave him the wrong number, prolonging the murder another 4 days or more. Hilton claimed that she fought him for 4 days before he finally killed and decapitated her. Interestingly enough, Christopher Clark, or Christopher Jones, in other words, was arrested multiple times for the crime of decapitation. There are people who are showing up in these woods who were dismembered or decapitated. That's no coincidence. Hilton attempted to get cash from his contacts, including the former employer, John Tabor. He threatened to kill Mr. John Tabor if he didn't give the $10,000. Other sources say John was in the news, which prompted him to make the call. Soon the local news featured Meredith's abduction and a Good Samaritan. I know my fellow animal lovers are wondering about Meredith's dog. He turned her loose and she was found in Kroger parking lot. After murdering Meredith, he couldn't bring himself to kill her dog. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad he didn't hurt the dog. But it strikes me as odd when he didn't have any regard for the victims. If Hilton did commit these other crimes, I hope he confesses before he runs out of time. I find it interesting and suspicious that in 1995 he produced a movie called Deadly Run. It's about a Georgia man who abducts attractive females and flies them to a secluded cabin. It's not exactly his MO, but it's close enough that it makes me wonder. Very interesting, is all I'm going to say about that. So Hilton was much more connected to this group, who was officially part of the Craig, than anyone has ever observed. More to come. So the witnesses claimed multiple times that one of the victims who was friends with Meredith got abducted and killed at the Tomoka State Park. That is interestingly enough in Florida. And when we look at this, the Tomoka State Park, directly alongside the Tomoka River, is near, and you couldn't even make this up, but it is correct and true. It's directly near and right by the Casey Jones RV Park and the lodge that belongs to Jones. Interestingly enough, it's directly, basically next door to it, which is next door to the river where that woman disappears in kind of an alligator infested area, and is very strangely enough right next to one of Stephen Bertolino's old offices. And you just can't get coincidences like that. Not anymore. When we go here and we look here at the Tomoka State Park area, this is like right here at St. Ormond Beach, Florida. And it's just bizarre that you see all this shady stuff going on. You see them going in and out of the area on these trails. There, again, is the official sign for the Tomoka Outpost. There's some hiking trails that go right off of that area and into the woods. But the woods look eerily the same, meaning very similar, if not the same, as the Pisgah National Forest. So the same kind of forest that is in Pisgah is, interestingly enough, right out here at the Tacoma State Park. And you got to admit, at a certain point, it starts being extremely bizarre and no longer any coincidence whatsoever that this whole area with the hiking trails where these women and also that man disappeared and was never seen from again, never heard or seen again, okay, is right here next to the Tomoka River, where that woman disappears with the alligators. And directly next door to the Casey Jones RV park and the lodge up the road. What do you know? The park is beautiful with an abundance of trees, wildlife, and water views with lots of birds. There are many activities for all the patrons: boating, fishing, hiking, camping, and even wildlife viewing. We are avid geocachers of the hiking trail and found 2 new ones this last weekend. State and national parks and forests are our go-to when we want to be outside of ourselves. We would definitely recommend this park. We found it quiet and lovely to spend the whole day outside. We choose these parks rather than overcrowded amusement parks and tourist attractions. And yet, this park is more like a serial killer park, to be exact. And it's a very strange place. Go over here and visit these places. There's at least 5 different hiking trails, so I encourage people to go out here and actually check this out. And the 5 different hiking trails are totally unsupervised. Hardly anybody's ever been down these trails at all. So it certainly wasn't Gary Michael Hilton out here going on all these trails. He's not an experienced hiker in that way, is he? Which makes the plot thicken yet again, because that's where Michael's dismembered body was essentially found. We go look at the actual weapon again. So I believe 100% now that that hiking group that is a part of the Craig were probably involved in these murders as well, especially Clark Jones. It's starting to become 100% crystal clear. They called him the National Forest serial killer. Between 2007 and 2008, Gary Hilton stalked the backcountry paths of the southern United States for over a decade, allegedly murdering John and Irene Bryant in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest, and then Cheryl Dunlap in Florida's Apalachicola National Forest, and Meredith Emerson in Georgia's Chattahoochee National Forest. In Florida, if you kill somebody, they give you $1 million defense for the insurance bonds, and then the jury convicts you and the judge sentences you to death. That's what happened, allegedly, in February of 2010, when convicted serial killer Gary Michael Hilton came to trial. I was there. It was the first and only time I've seen a courtroom like that. It was quite emotional because by then I had backtracked Hilton from birth to the present. Hilton's 2010 death sentence should have been the end of his case, but it wasn't. Flash forward to January 19, 2016. Death row inmate Gary Hilton was supposed to stand before a judge in Tallahassee for a new trial. But by a vote of 8-1, the Supreme Court struck down Florida's death penalty, requiring the legislature to throw it out and rewrite. Suddenly, Hilton was free. In 1963, a 17-year-old, or 70-year-old, no, in 1963, a 17-year-old Gary Hilton enlisted in the U.S. Army Cadets. He was sent to West Germany and assigned to the Davy Crockett platoon, named after the coonskin cap-wearing king of the wild frontier. Crockett had been a hero to kids like Hilton growing up. There were 19 men in the special platoon. Their task, direct and deploy the Davy Crockett missile. According to the Brookings Institute, it was the smallest and lightest nuclear weapon. So he was even working in a platoon on actual nuclear arms, or at least the defense of nuclear arms. The same kind of technical field and study that Clark Jones worked in the whole time, ironically enough, as a Secretary of the Navy, and a certain amount of time Secretary of the USMC, the Army. Now, how is that any coincidence? Is there any such thing as coincidence with that, ultimately? I'm starting to believe absolutely not. The Army put Hilton in a mental hospital where he was drugged with Thorazine and all of these others. Rather than give him a Section 8 psychiatric discharge, the Army gave him an honorable discharge by mistake. He was released in 1967 at age 21. Hilton was a good-looking guy. He was a long-distance runner, and according to some tests, possessed a genius-level IQ. But whether it was Hilton's painful childhood, his deteriorating mental state, or the lingering trauma of a childhood injury, the man just couldn't sustain a relationship or keep any jobs. He bounced around the South, as well as South Carolina, throughout the 1970s and 80s. At the dawn of the millennium, after burning through multiple marriages and jobs, Hilton found himself in Atlanta again, working as a roofer at age 54. If Hilton had one single passion, one comfort that offset the instability of his professional and personal life, it was the outdoors. In 2007, he and his ever-present companion dog Dandy hit the road in the Dodge Astro. They drove north, leaving the state of Georgia, right on into the Pisgah National Forest outside of Asheville. It was here Gary Michael Hilton encountered senior citizens Irene and John Bryant on a hike in a remote section of the park. And who gave him the map? Did he just automatically know how to get to all these places? I would wager no. Someone gave him the map to figure out any one of these trails. The Florida Supreme Court will soon decide whether Gary Michael Hilton should have his death sentence upheld or overturned. Hilton's attorney argued before the state's high court that Hilton's death sentence must be overturned and the case sent back to Leon County courtroom for a new jury. The original jury unanimously recommended a death sentence for Hilton in 2011 after he was found having stabbed John and Irene Bryant. The judge imposed it. Hilton's attorney, Robert Morris, argued for a new penalty phase, citing infighting among his trial defense team and a failure to argue whether Hilton was ineligible or not. Well, of course, this is the case because Gary Hilton didn't work alone, and he wasn't interested in going down for the crime alone. And I think that that's finally, obviously, getting to be 100% clear that he did not work alone when he murdered and set up as a composite image of the alleged firearm, of what the firearm would have looked like that shot and killed John and Irene Bryant. It's just basically a demonstration, mock-up type of image. There's no way to ever confirm or tell whether this sort of Sig Sauer type of automatic pistol was actually used. But many have commented over the years that it may have been something like this kind of 9mm handgun, or one that fired larger caps. It's just tragic. When I think about what happened to this couple, it's truly horrible that to this day we don't know what the original firearm looked like that shot them because it was sealed in that court file. But since that time, a lot of people have come up with these kind of mock-up images of what it may have looked like. And just when I look at that image, folks, when I look at that almost Sig Sauer style automatic pistol, I just automatically think, again, of the hunters. And definitely of Clark Jones. So this has been good. This has been a great update and a great new cursory examination of this case in part 2. And there's going to be a part 3. So if you've enjoyed what you have experienced here today, be sure to like. Definitely leave your comments and spread the videos, and also subscribe, because there needs to be answers in this sort of case. And it's horrible to think of what happened to them all these years later, and their family still doesn't really have clear answers. But this pistol here, you can see it's certainly something that would definitely fit the profile for being shot in that forest. There was a lot of strange bullet casings that were found in that forest. And when there's time, this channel is going to go over a number of the bullet casings that were truly found around the area in that forest. I can tell you that. Also some of the bullets and what they may have looked like. It's just not good that we haven't been able to see the original weapon. And I hope you guys get this case, especially of the Bryant's case, out there as far and wide as you can, because the more that is done, the sooner people are finally going to be able to see what that weapon looks like. And if people are finally able to see that from the court filing, or at least close to the original photograph of that weapon as one can get, then they will be able to confirm via tangible evidence at that point what truly happened with John and Irene Bryant that night. And not only that, with the other 5 victims in that area, because they were shot with bullets. They had bullet holes in them. And it's a horrific event to look back on that. So thank you. Make sure to spread the word. Get this case out far and wide. All right. And take care.